listening to, I say you are listening to, you are absolutely listening to the George Espenlaub Show, coming to you live from the Funny Farm. Now, with no further ado, here comes Georgie!
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I thank Charlie for that fine introduction. I can't help but sit or tell you that when Charlie does his intro, I sit here and I kind of laugh. I've got the mic turned off. Sometimes I laugh out loud because I'm thinking, I wonder what people are thinking. What is Charlie? Who is Charlie? Where did Charlie come from? And I'll take time. If you've been listening to us for a number of years, I'll take some time to explain it to the new folks of who Charlie is, what Charlie does, where Charlie came from, and the whole 9 yards. But you're listening to the George Espenlaub Show, coming to you live from the Funny Farm in a place called Our World. It's a lot safer here in our world than it is in yours. And whether you're down the street, around the corner, across America, or somewhere around this world, we want you to sit back. Yes, we want you to sit back tonight. Most of the time we tell you to get up and loosen up because we're going to dance, we're going to sing, we're going to do something. But tonight, I want you to find a seat because to me, this is one of the most startling, perplexing, and I'll be lost for words if I continue, issues that faces our society today. It's right there in front of us. It's around us. It's everywhere. And I'm afraid, and I'm including myself, I'm afraid that we have just either ignored it, pretended that it wasn't there. If we saw it, we closed our eyes. If we heard it, we closed our ears. But we're going to talk to a man tonight who is fighting human trafficking. And ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, a man that does that has to have a burden for those people that are in perplexing ways. And so with no further ado, I want to introduce our guest tonight, and I thank him so much for his time. Raleigh Sadler has served in Christian ministry since 2001. Currently, he's the founder and executive director of Let My People Go. They're headquartered in New York City. He is also the author of Vulnerable, Rethinking Human Trafficking. And his passion, I like when I hear people have a passion. His passion is to see the local church fight global injustices like human trafficking by loving those most vulnerable. He believes that the church should be leading the way in the fight against human trafficking because the gospel frees us to pursue justice and mercy in our communities. He believes it. He believes that it's the responsibility of the church to love those who are at risk of exploitation. Raleigh, thank you so much for coming on the George Espenlaub Show.
George, thank you for having me.
We had a little chat before we went on the air, and I don't mind admitting, as I was reading your websites this afternoon and all the things that's there. I read the statistics, and I don't mind saying that even now, I've got goosebumps just thinking about this subject. It is more prevalent than most of us think it is, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, human trafficking happens, in plain sight, and that's often hidden behind our assumptions. When we see certain things, we have labels that we put on top of them. We'll say, oh, that person chose a life of prostitution, or that person wants to work and be paid nothing. And we don't know that we could be actually looking in the face of sex and labor trafficking. And when we start thinking about the numbers, that there are more than 40 million people who are held in what amounts to modern-day slavery around the world, it forces us to rethink what we know to be true.
That is a staggering amount of people, 40 to 45 million people. I mean, and then I was reading on your website about how the New York police have been cracking down, and it just drove it home as I read these things. It just drove it home that this thing, this evilness, is all around us, and I mean we're, for lack of a better term, we're rubbing shoulders with this monster just about every day in all parts of our country. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's interesting because every now and then I will bump into people around the country, and they'll say, you know what, I appreciate what your organization is doing to fight human trafficking, but we don't have it in our community. And I'll always push back on that. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't have it? And they'll be like, well, we're not near a major city, and we're not necessarily near a major highway, and there's no organized criminal elements in our community. So, of course, we couldn't have human trafficking. And, again, this is back at that assumption level. I generally ask them, well, do you have vulnerable people? Because here's the deal. Human trafficking can happen anywhere because there are vulnerable people everywhere. And human trafficking, simply put, is the exploitation of vulnerability for commercial gain. And so someone who has power and status is exploiting someone with less power and status. It may not be that much of a divide, but they have leverage over that person, and they're able to prey upon that person's lack of options and really coerce that person to make a decision, or force them or trick them into making a decision to do something they wouldn't do on their own had they had more options. Now,
I get your point, because you're in New York City, you're there in Manhattan, so everybody thinks all the bad things happen in the big cities, but out here in the rural communities, most of our work around here is agriculture, although we have other things. So we tend to think that all them bad things, like you said, happens on a major highway leading to the big cities and so on and so forth. My question is, Raleigh, how in the world, and thank God you did, but how in the world did you ever get involved in this?
I was a pastor working with college students at a historically black college and university in West Virginia. And while I was there, a lot of the leaders of the school kind of took me under their wing, and they were saying, you know what, we understand that you're a Christian, that you're a pastor. Have you thought about what God thinks about justice and mercy and what it looks like for us to love our neighbors? And they really just kind of taught me in a really cool way, and I just kind of learned kind of under them. And it was during that time that I took some students to a conference in Atlanta called Passion, and they were talking about human trafficking. They were talking about how each of us, whether we know it or not, we create a demand for human trafficking. You see, human trafficking would not happen if there was not a demand. And so, like the the law of supply and demand works and everything else, it works with human trafficking. And so someone was speaking, her name was Christine Kane, and as she was speaking, she said, that we can create a demand by what we watch, and then also we know that we can also create a demand by what we eat, by what we wear. If we're not paying the highest price for our goods, chances are someone else is. And so when she was talking about this, and specifically when she was talking about just pornography and how people consume that, and just the staggering amount of pornography that's consumed, ultimately it hit me that anyone who has ever seen that, they're consuming the suffering of someone else, most likely. And that struck me to the heart. And I just remember saying, God, I'm sorry. I am sorry. Like I hadn't, I knew it was bad. Right. I knew it was not okay. But I didn't know that there were people who were being forced, people were being coerced into doing this. And that since then, I've learned that most of my friends who've been trafficked for sex will say that ultimately there were videos made and there were videos uploaded online. And so in that moment, it just broke my heart, and it showed me that I, like every other human on the planet, had created demand for exploitation of my neighbors. And I just cried out to God, and I said, I'm sorry. And then right after that, I felt the need to do something about it, not just say something in word only, but bring action to it. And so I actually share that story in my book that I wrote that came out in February called Vulnerable, Rethinking Human Trafficking, because I think it's key for all of us. If our why isn't right, like if our motivation for doing this isn't substantial, and like you said earlier, if we don't have that passion that's rooted in something substantial, we'll care about this, but then we'll move on to something else in time. And so yeah, that's kind of how it started for me.
I lived right outside of Pittsburgh years and years ago, and I'll share this with you. I was going to a hospital on the north side of Pittsburgh, and when I was coming back from the hospital, and I passed this church, this huge, humongous church. It had many, many, many steps from the sidewalk going up to the great big doors. And when I was coming back, just as I came around the circle and made the turn, I saw this little old man, tattered clothes, tattered shoes, with a little bag. And he was sitting about midway up on these steps that led to the church. And I will never forget that, Raleigh. If I live to be 150, I will never forget that scene. Because in my mind's eye at that particular time, I pictured, and I'm not putting people that go to church down. Trust me, believe me, I'm not doing that. But I could picture people in their suits, their clean clothes, and all those things walking up these steps. And I wonder if anyone would ever take the time to stop and minister to that man. And I said that because of this. When you said that you felt God speaking to you, and you cried out and asked God to forgive you, that is rare today, my friend, to where someone would say, all right, Lord, this is my calling. There's going to be deep valleys. There's going to be rough spots. There's going to be wars. There's going to be fights. There's going to be spiritual warfare. But I'm going to man up. And if you'll lead and guide me, I'll go. And I just wish that many, many other people would answer the call to these things that's around us just like you did. And I thank you for that.
Well, I think a lot of us, we see these things. We see what's happening in our community. We see brokenness. We see families that are impacted by horrible things that have ultimately made them vulnerable. And we don't respond sometimes because maybe we feel ill-equipped. Maybe we can't do anything. Sometimes we feel that someone else will do something. And then some of us do the first thing that comes to mind, which is generally the worst thing that we could do. But I found that through doing this work that every one of us can do something. And sometimes our greatest need as vulnerable people is community. It's interaction with other people. And I've found just in working with other people, like, one of the best ways to find out if someone is being exploited is to know them and to know them well. And over time, that person is going to share things and you're going to be able to clue in. And if you're close with them, you'll be able to kind of walk with them as they kind of go along on a journey to healing, so to speak, to use some imagery.
So your book is titled Vulnerable, Rethinking Human Trafficking. And folks can get the book where?
Well, one easy place that's kind of a one-stop shop is thevulnerablebook.com. You can go to that website, and it has a description of the book. You can download a free chapter, but you can also go on Amazon.com, and they're actually offering it for a great price right now. So it's available on Amazon, and so you can get it there.
And I need to throw this in here real quick. Ladies and gentlemen, you can go to Raleigh's website. It's lmpgnetwork.org. And the other one is instagram.com/LMPG network. And we posted that up on our Facebook page, so you can go back there and get it. But go to Amazon and get this book. Raleigh, tell me about some of the vulnerable people that's around each and every one of us.
You know, it's interesting. When we think about who traffickers would target, we often have this picture in our minds of things like we've seen on TV or the news, but oftentimes, like I said earlier, traffickers are going to target people that they can have leverage over. That could be the single mother in your community. That could be your new immigrant neighbor. That could be your homeless neighbor. That could be those around you that are facing difficult disabilities that kind of push them to the side, or people who are looking for, even just people who are looking for acceptance or love. I have a friend who was trafficked who all she was looking for was a father's love, and then here comes this charismatic young man. He meets her on the train, and he treats her great for about a year. And then the compliments kind of gave way to mockery, and he started treating her really poorly. See, he built her up to tear her down so that she would be malleable to do what he wanted her to do in the first place. And so regardless of your vulnerability, you could be trafficked, you may be trafficked, or you have been trafficked. We fall somewhere on this vulnerability timeline. And what I found is traffickers are looking for people who are not in community, who do not have the protection of a family or close friends who are really looking out for them, like really looking out for them. They find people, they kind of isolate them so that they can exploit them. They take away the positive voices in their lives, and then they kind of work to reshape that person through traumatic bonding. And so yeah, the vulnerability could really be anything, but it's a fact that no matter where we live, there are vulnerable people everywhere.
Do you have any excuse me, do you have any idea of the missing children and the teenagers and the young adults and even some of the middle-aged and older adults that's going missing? I assume that there's a possibility that they may have been trafficked.
Yes, there's a possibility for sure. Oftentimes when we think of missing children, we think of people who could have been kidnapped and abducted into trafficking, and it does happen. It can and does happen, but it's more considered rare. Oftentimes runaways can go. They'd be looking for help or what have you, and they're actually groomed, and so they may not be abducted, but someone just may find them vulnerable and then groom them into what they want them to do. So yeah, I would say that there could be many who are missing, who have been trafficked or things like that. But I would say that a lot of them were kind of groomed rather than abducted. Though that does happen, it's not primarily what happens.
And perhaps that's...
And I've met people who were abducted. But.
And perhaps that's what many of us think when we hear about human trafficking. People that have been kidnapped, taken away, so on and so forth. And we kind of put that and human trafficking together, and that's as far as we go. But you said something earlier, and I have always said this: somebody is going to influence our life, whether for the good or whether for the bad. And doesn't Scripture say that the enemy comes to steal, kill, and to destroy? And he's waiting. And so one or the other is going to influence somebody, whether they be young, middle-aged, or old. We're all vulnerable, and like you said, we want loved. We want to be loved. And so that sets this whole thing up to where people are so vulnerable that whoever reaches out to them and can influence them is probably going to win the battle for now, right?
Well, yeah, I don't know about you. I grew up fishing with my father, and I remember when we would go fishing, he would put like a lure on the end of the line. It was always something shiny or bright, or and we throw it in the water. We let it sit there for a little bit, and then sometimes we let it sit there for a lot bit because I wasn't the greatest fisherman. But as we're bringing that in, something will finally bite it. And that's how traffickers work. They kind of set a lure out there. They find that thing that you're looking for. Is it love? Is it money? Is it housing? Is it food? Is it clothing? Is it status? Is it power? What is it that you're looking for? And then they're like a shark in the water. They're going straight for that wound because they can find what you're looking for. And just like a shark senses blood, once they see it, they know exactly what to do.
What?
And yeah, I mean.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, yeah, that's ultimately how they exploit that vulnerability.
Now, how does Let My People Go combat against this thing?
It's interesting because when I started sensing a call to fight human trafficking, I started thinking, like, who am I to do anything about this? This is a problem that's way, way above me. I trained to be a pastor. I worked with college students. How could I fight human trafficking? And then I started realizing that there were many like me. They don't know what to do. And I'll never forget, I throwed and I started thinking, okay, we're going to work with churches. So we were doing awareness events and letting people know what it looked like and how they could respond. But then I was talking with a friend of mine named Anna, and as we were talking, she told me about how she had been in an exploitative relationship and how she had basically been trafficked for 5 years. And I asked her, I said, what did the local church do for you? And she laughed. She said, Raleigh, I was in church for 5 years and no one ever noticed. She's like, to be fair, I never noticed because oftentimes survivors don't self-identify. But they didn't notice. And that struck a chord with me. And so what Let My People Go does is we work to empower the local church to fight human trafficking by loving those most vulnerable. Our goal is to help the church create a congregational approach where the entire congregation is given the tools they need to identify and respond to those who are most vulnerable to human trafficking. But we also work to help the church collaborate with the right local stakeholders, those who are nonprofits, social services, local law enforcement, so that the church is not doing this all on their own, but they're doing this within a communal context. They're working with leaders in their community. And we also aim to help the church realize that they can do this from a gospel motivation because of what God did for us. We are now free to love others. We've been set free from sin as believers, so now we are set free to love our neighbor, even if that neighbor doesn't love us back, even if it's a difficult situation, even if we suffer for it. And so Let My People Go really works to help the church identify vulnerable people and really empower them.
Raleigh, about just as you started on your last part, we went dead. I've got people in the chat room saying we went dead. We're up live, but we went dead. I don't know if, and I checked, the internet service is up, and I have no idea what happened. Man, oh man.
Well, maybe people weren't supposed to hear that last part.
No.
We can say it again.
No, that was a vital part. Trust me, that was a vital part. My goodness gracious, Raleigh, I apologize for this. Yeah, they're telling me that it's dead. It's dead. Somebody said, OMG, nothing, still dead. And I don't know why that happened, and that doesn't happen. But it sure did this time. Raleigh, could perhaps I could get up with Alex and we could reschedule this again?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, man, I want people to hear this. I prayed before we went on the air. Cassandra said now she hears us. But there's been such a long gap in between. Raleigh, can I get up with Alex and we'll reschedule this thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
All righty. Raleigh, I thank you so much for your time, and I apologize for whatever happened. My goodness gracious, that's the last thing we ever wanted to happen. I apologize. But my brother, thank you so much. So much.
No, thank you.
And we'll get back with...
I look forward to doing part 2 with you.
All righty. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, my brother.
You got it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cassandra, you could hear him the whole time? We're still live. Cassandra said, I hear you. Did you hear us the whole time, Cassandra? If you'd help us out. That's the thing about live radio. You get all the warts, all the wrinkles. Wow. I really feel bad about that. Yes, I could hear except for a few seconds. Oh, my goodness gracious sakes alive. All right, man, oh man. Yes, I could hear, except for a few seconds. All right. I don't know what happened. I was getting a report that it said that it's dead. It's completely out. I kept looking, and it was live. So I apologize to our listeners for that. We're going to have Raleigh come back. He's going to be so gracious to come back. We'll make arrangements for him to come back and do part 2. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, friends, Romans, and countrymen, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that this has happened. I apologize. I just can't apologize enough. But listen, we're going to get this thing done, and we're going to get it redone, and we're going to get it redone right. We're going to find out whatever the problem was. But anyhow, I appreciate you for being with us tonight. I'm so sorry. So sorry. I apologize to Raleigh and to Alex and to all of our listeners. But we'll get this right, and we'll bring him back. I'm not used to things like this happening. It doesn't make Espenlaub a very happy camper. But nonetheless, thank you for hanging in there with us. Thank you for everything that you've done, for all the fine comments, for all the emails, for all the messages, for all the things that you have done for us. Thank you very, very much. Until, what's today, Monday? Until Wednesday night. Wednesday night we'll have Mr. Richard Green with us, who has written a book, Agents of Deceit, a former IRS worker, whistleblower, and he's coming on with us to tell us about the things of the IRS. You won't want to miss it. So Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, right here on Spreaker.com. So until then, if it's nighttime where you're at, have a great night. If it's daytime, have a great day. But wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, until then, this is George Espenlaub and all the gang here at the Funny Farm. We say thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you later.